It is the moment of extreme pleasure to welcome the guests who are present here to attend this workshop. On behalf of the institution, I offer my regards to all judges and the people who joining us. For almost 4 years now, we have been facing many challenges in the world with the COVID-19 virus. We also had to do our learning in online. But final year students, final project or research papers cannot be done in online. It is certain that these students have missed the proper guidelines by conducting their lectures in online. As a solution to this, the Faculty of Applied Sciences of University of Sabaragamuwa has organized a research program for their final year research. It is my great honor and pleasure to introduce the senior lecturer, Mr. A.L.C.J. Lienage, obtained his MSc in Food Technology and Nutrition in Lund University in Sweden, MSc Entrepreneurship also in Lund University in Sweden, BSc Special in Food Science and Technology in Sabaragamuwa University of Sri Lanka, Professional Graduate Diploma in British Computer Society, Higher Diploma in IT, University of Colombo School of Computing. He graduated in 2005 in Sabaragamuwa University of Sri Lanka and he became a lecturer in Sabaragamuwa University. And he is still working as a senior lecturer on our university. There are the research interests of senior lecturer Mr. A.L.C.J. Lienage. Valorization of food waste streams, food processing byproducts, bio-based materials for food packaging, bacterial cellulose-based monocomposites, bioconversion of organic waste by block solder fly larvae, food safety issues of street vended food and risk assessment, blockchain and IoT-based food traceability systems. So, without any further delay, I would like to invite Mr. Senior Lecturer, Mr. A.L.C.J. Lienage to start this webinar. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Rashmi, for this kind introduction. I'm really glad to contribute to this very good initiative taken by the academic subcommittee of the Faculty of Applied Sciences Students Union. I think it's kind of timely, rather very critical requirement that these research related aspects, which probably you may have missed to witness in person, especially via physical lectures, to be delivered in the form of these online lectures, and also to make these students aware on different aspects of research and basics of scientific research, and that also includes certain aspects on research methodologies, research philosophies, and also on writing. So today I've been invited to conduct a session on scientific writing. I will try to make this somewhat general, because I think for you students from all the 5 departments studying the 5 or other few different disciplines in the faculty, they have some specific requirements with regard to writing when it comes to the scientific and technical requirements. For instance, like you have your own guidelines when it comes to research project report writing, especially the CI students, they might follow the ECMO IEEE guidelines and so on. And then probably for the other disciplines like natural resources, food science, sports sciences, physical sciences, there may be some other set of guidelines. So I will try to make it somewhat general, and I will try to teach you or rather make you aware on some fundamental aspects on scientific writing and how to make this process, the process of scientific writing, an effective one. Right. So let me share slides. Can you see my slides on screen? Are the slides visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Right. So with this particular session, I will try to focus on some of the principles and the best practices. You will probably be exposed to some of the good principles that you can apply in all forms of scientific writing. I will not specifically target any specific domain or scientific discipline, but this will be mostly a very general overview on the process itself. So after this lecture, or more or less this session, I will try to make it somewhat interactive, like for you to also interact at different points. I will the key learning objectives after completing this session, more or less the lecture, will be that you will be able to define the term scientific writing, define what constitutes scientific writing, more or less, and then also to explain how scientific writing differs from other kinds of writing. And thirdly, explain why scientific writing is important from your perspective as undergraduates. Like scientific writing as a name implies, it's important for everyone involved in science, not only undergraduates, but for even everyone, all scientists. So you will be able to explain the significance or importance of scientific writing for you, especially as undergraduates, and also some constraints associated with like student context when you write and present your research work. And then also some forms of scientific writing which are considered appropriate as scientific writing, different forms. And then we will focus on defining three critical aspects or elements of scientific writing: the content, style, and the form, which will be introduced in different. I will take some specific cornerstones of writing to explain the content, style, and form related aspects. Then I will try to introduce you some style guidelines for effective scientific writing. And this will also be one of the key learning objectives. And then you'll be able to describe some key characteristics of high quality scientific writing. And then I will finally point you to some useful resources which you can use at your leisure time to develop yourself as an effective scientific writer. Even when you graduate, there's still time for you to like develop yourself. Now we see that nowadays learning is visualized as a lifelong activity, and we call it lifelong learning. So your learning will not stop even if you graduate from this faculty. So then you will use these resources to continuously improve yourself. Right? Continuous importance element is very important when it comes to scientific writing. So these resources will be also useful for you to like learn and further improve yourself in a scientific manner. Right. So having said that, when it comes to scientific writing, if I may take a definition from one of the texts written, rather one of the available publications. This one is by two authors, Barbara and T. Roberts. They use the term scientific writing to describe or denote the reporting of what you find in as original research in journals, and usually through scientific papers in any standard format. So there comes this keyword journal, and I think already now some of you may be first year students, but I think many of you have, those who have attended this session or those who are in this session, maybe in the third year or rather maybe in the fourth year. So at least I think like you, by this time, you may have referred to at least one journal in your field, rather whatever the field, doesn't matter. So may I ask you to just type in the chat any scientific journal that you have referred to so far? Any scientific journal, any scientific publication, magazine that you have referred so far, if you remember the name. And if you obviously have referred to a research paper published in these journals, probably you may remember the name. So if you remember the name, could you please type any name in the chat? Just to make sure that how many, I mean, it's not required if you haven't referred to any sort of like journal. But if anyone remembers any name of a journal, can you please type it in the chat? Anybody remembers the name of a journal that you have referred to for some assignment or something? Yes, I see. Right. An answer. LCV. LCV is actually a publisher, one of the largest scientific publishers. And LCV publishes thousands of journals. Maybe a journal. PubMed, yes, it's a good resource. Yes. PubMed is again a collection of good resources where you can find all life science related publications. It's again a repository, more or less, PubMed. And it's also not a journal. IPEN report, yes, that looks more or less like a journal. And yeah, if you remember, you may expand the abbreviation IPEN. I think it was typed by you. And Science Direct is also again a repository where you can find lots of journals and the subsequent papers publishing. Comspective, oh yes, this is I think our own publication, yes, from the Department of CIS, that's fine. Yeah, so at least I see a couple of names here indicating that some of you have access, at least some of you have access it through a large resource like a database like PubMed, Science Direct, or Elsevier, right? So at least you remember these names, like these are very commonplace names when it comes to scientific publications, right? So this deals with more or less the field of scientific writing deals with those things that you extract from these databases like Elsevier, PubMed, and then whatever deposited there comes from journals. So journals are the places where original scientific works are published. Right? There are lots of journals. I can probably like list all journals in even my field of study, food science. There are so many numerous, right? But generally, the term scientific writing commonly applies to the reporting of these original research that you find in journals, and also in journals you will find scientific papers, right, or articles, and then it has a standard format, right? The standard format, I will come to that also. Standard format also ensures that you have some basic style to report your work. So start with an abstract and then an introduction, materials and methods, and then your results, then discussion and final conclusions and references, right? So that order is there in all these journal papers that you may have referred to. So this basically, the primary purpose of all these papers or journal published in journals is to communicate new scientific findings. So that is the essence of scientific writing. In scientific writing, you always talk of communicating your findings, right? It could be a new finding, very new finding, a novel finding, or it may be some sort of revised appearance of a previous finding. A finding may be refined, right? It's possible that you may refine a finding. So this is ultimately goes in the form of a paper in a journal, and then that is where you talk of scientific writing. So scientific writing in the most strict sense of definition applies to these published work. But scientific writing also includes some other aspects, and these include some communication about science, right? So you not only engage in writing by publishing your, if you have some findings, yes, obviously, the best thing you could do is you can convert it to a publication and you can publish it in a reputed journal, right? We call them the index journals. And then the communication, the second aspect about communication also includes other forms of publications such as review papers, which will not describe original research findings. It's a review. It's something that has a discussion, a deeper discussion on some findings in the field already. It's a critical evaluation, right? Comprehensive and critical evaluation on one topic. So you may find lots of review papers on different topics. You may have referred to review papers for your assignments and some other requirements. And then these summarize and integrate previously published research, right? So then you have one aspect on the principal aspect that comes under scientific writing, deals with the original research work published in the form of articles in journals. And then it also comes the review papers, right? Where this previously found work, published work, collected and reviewed. So this is the other aspect. And then thirdly also, in a broader sense, scientific writing also include other forms of professional scientific communications to scientific audiences, right? Done by scientists, and they include proposals. You will have to write a proposal generally in the fourth year before you begin your final year research work, right? Maybe for CI students it's earlier, but for the other departments, generally typically in the fourth year, you have to write a project proposal. And then after, maybe after graduating, maybe if you decide to work on a research lab, you may need to write a grant proposal. This is also a form of scientific writing. It's very highly technical and read by a technical audience, and it includes only scientific information. It's not like a fiction that you can read from the beginning to the end, and which has like some sort of good end or bad end. But then it's definitely targeted for securing a grant, and then it has like a scientific purpose. And then comes oral presentation. This is also considered as a form of scientific writing, even though it's a communication, and also post presentation. In post presentations, obviously you have to type, and also in oral presentations also you have to type. If you conduct an oral presentation using PowerPoint, you still have to type, which is another form of writing. And then in the poster, you have to like draft your poster using text. So this is another form of writing. So scientific writing will not only stop at publications, but they also include other forms of communication where scientists are involved, and these are required by scientists, right? So these are some general concepts about, rather general ways in which you will come across scientific writing. And if you dig deeper into scientific writing is essentially a form of technical writing. Now, this has a technical background because you use technical terms in a discipline. When you write something, proposal in computing, you use technical terms related to computing, and maybe it's related to programming, and then you have to use specific terms related to that context. And then if you want to write something related to geology, you have to use the specific technical terms. If you want to write something dealing with physiotherapy, you have to use the specific technical terms. So it's very technical, and it's a very form of technical writing. And here what you try to do would be you report all scientific observations. Generally in science, everything is based on the results of observations where you perform, which you get via performing experiments. So you have experiments, right? And then you get observations, and then you try to describe these observations, so discuss these observations, results, findings, right? And this is governed by a specific process or governed by specific conventions. And what is contained in these conventions will be the discussion of this lecture today, right? I will discuss about these general conventions used in scientific writing so that you can use it for any context, right? Then secondly, another important characteristic about scientific writing, this also forms part of its definition. It tries to frame a problem in the context of what you do, your current work in the field, right? So you engage in an experiment, or you get involved in a study, and then you have some area to work in that study, right? And then in that field, you try to find the solution to a problem, right? A research problem, and then you come up with the solution. You may come up with, or you may try to improvise an existing solution, improve, right? And then you have to present the research using some standard format, right? And in that standard format, your focus is on describing your methodology taken and in your results, most importantly, and then coming up with discussion and going to conclusions so that anyone can refer to your study. So basically, scientific writing, if it follows a standard format, it's easy. Everywhere it follows the same format. No matter where the study is conducted, whether it's conducted in Sri Lanka, whether it's conducted in UK, whether it's conducted in US, or anywhere, somewhere in a very remote island, it doesn't matter. It's part of science, right? So scientific writing, when it follows the same format, and it's easy for anyone dealing with science to read and understand that that every reported work, if it follows this style, start with an introduction, goes to materials and methods, then comes the results and discussion, and then conclusions. If it follows that same standard format, then it's easy. Anyone involved in science to read and understand and skim, exact or extract the useful information, major findings and conclusion. If you want to get to know what exactly these authors have found, yes, the conclusion section is there. You can directly jump to the conclusions, avoiding or skipping all the other contents if you are interested more in the conclusions. And this is easy because all papers that you read follow the same format, right? Whatever the paper that you take, it doesn't matter from which database you take it, whether it's from Wiley, whether it's from LCB, whether it's from PubMed, whatever source, they follow the same format, the journals, of the papers in the journals, right? So it's very easy for you to extract this information and to look for their findings and interpretations. So that is one of the key characteristics of scientific writing. Then comes a question: why is this scientific writing so important? Why is it so significant? Right. Because you all probably are budding scientists, right? Because you are undergraduate students, and then many of you would like to become scientists one day, and sometimes if you still don't want to become scientists, you will be using science in so many different ways, right? Related to your work or profession or whatsoever. So scientists generally are those people, I mean, they don't always work in the labs. Scientists and researchers are the people always involved in research, and they work usually in the labs. But scientists have a broader context. When you use the term scientist, they do not only research, but then they have to do something beyond research, basic research. So generally, all scientists have to do one critical or important they have to get engaged in this important activity of communicating or disseminating the knowledge of what they have gathered. So in lots of different situations, scientists have to communicate, right? And then this is again for different types of audience. The audience also differs, right? Based on what you're going to explain. So scientists have to explain their findings in so many ways. The common form word could be a report. You get engaged in a project like you do in your final year, you have to produce a report. And this is what we evaluate. From the report, we know that you have followed this methodology, and then you have obtained these results, and then you are trying to critically evaluate or discuss the results, right? And the scientists have to write articles if they have a very important major finding. They can disseminate this finding to the entire scientific community via an article, journal article, which is published in a journal. And then they have to submit proposals, right? And these proposals may be for grants in most cases, right? And they have to secure a grant if they want to do some advanced research. Yes, they have to write a research proposal, and then only they will be secured in this grant. And then they have to maintain web pages. Then they have to write, let's say, blogs or something about research. So they have to use scientific writing in all these ways. And then they have to also use scientific writing in the form of abstracts, in the form of oral presentations, in the form of poster presentations, right? for conferences, symposia, lectures, meetings, right? In all places, it deals with scientific writing, right? And then also this differs again. Sometimes the scientists will be present in their findings to a very specific audience. And this is only for scientists. Like if you go for a conference, in the conference, like if it's a conference for, say, environmental sciences, it's more or less professionals in that field. Maybe professionals in the related field. So those who are studying chemical sciences would be also there. And if you go to a conference in computing, more or less like it's those people involved in computing and in information sciences or information systems. Then there are very specific audiences, and then also scientists have to communicate their findings to very general audiences like publics, right? General public. Sometimes like they have to engage in like writing, translating their work to, say, leaflets, information brochures for the general public. There are lots of medical research, but then there's one health information bureau. Their job is to translate all these medical findings into brochures, leaflets, where the public can understand. So this is like for the non-technical audiences. So scientists will always have to think of their audiences when it comes to communication. They will not strictly target, or rather they will not strictly always target the special or dedicated or specific audiences. Sometimes they have to like go beyond their traditional technical audiences and go for non-technical audiences. So still, but then the general science, the facts remain the same. It's only a matter of like the language chosen, selected, right? So all of these require analyzing each situation very carefully and deciding upon the best way to communicate, whether it's like in the form of an abstract, whether it's in the form of like a report, whether it's in the form of a paper, journal article. So whatever which fits to a situation, the scientist has to decide the form of writing. So scientific writing gets on its way at many places. So that's why as undergraduates also you will make sure that this process is part and parcel. Right. So where are the places where you will encounter scientific writing in your journey as an undergraduate? And in most cases, you will want to, if you want to do engage in some research prior to the submission of a proposal, you may be required to submit a concept note. In some cases, you have to draft your concept in the form of a concept note, and then the concept note needs to be converted to a proposal afterwards if the concept note is accepted. So generally, you will most cases write project proposals in your undergraduate career, which is very scientific and very technical, right? You have to submit a project proposal before you get on with your the final year research project, and then comes reports, and these there could be intermediate reports like the progress reports before coming to the final report. Intermediate reports will include like progress review reports while you are going on with the project. Generally, also when you get engaged in a large scale research project, which is like, let's say, a funded research project, you have to generally submit progress report, let's say an yearly interval. If the project lasts for 3 years, sometimes you have to submit progress reports every 6 months. And this is very scientific again, right? The progress report should be submitted to the granting agency. For instance, we have these projects, the funded projects in the faculty, funded by this aid grant, the World Bank grant. And then you have to regularly submit progress reports for these grants at specific intervals, especially for these researchers involved in this project grants involved in research and commercialization of the outputs. You have to like submit maybe quarterly reports or half-yearly reports or annual reports, right? So likewise, progress reports need to be submitted, and you will also sometimes be required to submit progress reports in your undergraduate career while you get engaged in your research projects. And then comes your final reports, which will be evaluated, will be graded on these, and then comes the papers that you may write. Some of you may want to write a manuscript and publish this manuscript in a journal or magazine or whatsoever. And many of you will publish your work in the form of abstracts, right, in conferences, symposia, and also you will probably present. I mean, after presenting it, I mean, there's mandatory presentation of poster in the final year, but afterwards you may still want to present it as a poster or an oral presentation in some other venue location like conference or symposium. So during the undergraduate career also there are lots of involvement with this scientific writing process, which will ultimately make you suitable as for a role as a scientist, right? Because we are dealing with sciences anyhow. Right. Then comes the question, why scientific writing is so special, so unique? We always talk about writing, and then comes the difference between writing and scientific writing. And what makes scientific writing so unique? What makes it so special? And this is because scientific writing has different goals. Whatever the form of writing, right? So your purpose of writing in most cases is to inform others. If you take a newspaper article, the purpose of writing a newspaper article is to inform others or entertain others. It could be a feature article or it could be a general news article. If it's a general news article, the purpose is to inform others. Let's say there was an accident which involved like lots of damage. You may see it in the form of a short piece of news story in a newspaper. And the purpose of this is to inform others, right? And inform others about, let's say, the casualties, and then also about the seriousness of the incident, and then also about consequences of like reckless driving, for instance, right? So one key goal of writing, any form of writing, is to inform. So that goal is also valid for scientific writing. You generally write to inform your audience and also to persuade them to do something. And this also is true for scientific writing. But basically, besides this basic goal, the communication of ideas of information, or rather communication of information and ideas, is a vital piece of any writing. And here in scientific writing, what differs, what's unique in this is, or rather what makes it different from other forms of writing, is that it does this job in a very efficient and effective manner. Because if you take a published paper, there are limited number of papers. You can't write, let's say, if it's a fiction, maybe you can find a fiction which lasts for like, probably fiction might contain 200, 300 pages or so, but you can't write a paper that long, right? There are always word limits, that this many words can only, let's say, 1,500 words or 5,000 words can be included in your article. So it's very done in a very effective manner. It's very concise, brief, and it's to the point. And then it uses only the facts. Right? So it's based on facts. And then, like any other piece of writing, right? If you take, let's say, newspaper writing or writing in any other form, fiction or whatsoever, general prose, or what's the other forms of classical writing. Scientific writing also involves some conventions. These conventions are very unique to science, and then also best practices. And well, later on we will try to get hold on these best practices, which can be generally applied to any form of scientific writing. And these conventions in scientific writing or science writing are based on certain principles, which are also unique to the scientific method, which is the pillar or the cornerstone of science. And these include, number one, objectivity. I will come to that later when it comes to like conventions. Objectivity involves you describe things without the involvement of your personal opinions, right? So you will not describe them by referring to your personal, let's say, inspirations or thoughts or whatsoever. It's more or less like done in a broad and in a manner which gives consensus to general principles of science. And secondly, it's very precise. You give information which is repeatable, right? You take any research paper, and then the methodology is there. And even in the methodology, you have to explain everything. The type of the reagents used, and then the type of the instruments, apparatus. Sometimes you, in most cases, you will also give the brand, model, manufacturer, country of origin, and the specific parameters used, testing parameters used in this machine. So anyone can repeat. So precision deals with this, right? And so to whatever extent you can be true, and as well as like you can, to whatever extent you can repeat this experiment. So everything is summarized in this methodology. And then clarity. It's only the required information, right? It's very clear. So the reader gets a clear picture on the research. That's the idea. And then it's very efficient because it has like a limited, it conveys all this information in a very limited number of space, let's say 5-6 pages. Within these 5-6 pages, as defined by the journal policies, right? So within these five pages, we have to explain the whole story, right? So it's very efficient in that sense compared to other forms of writing. So compared to some other disciplines, like unlike in some other disciplines, scientific writing, the focus or the primary emphasis of scientific writing is on the facts and the subject matter. It's not dealing with anything fictitious. It's always referring to facts. And how do you derive facts? By your own experiments, right? So there is no such thing like in, if you find in classic literature, it's very rhetorical, and it could be based on emotions, the personal emotions of the writer. If you take fiction, a certain writer would follow a certain style, right? And then it doesn't involve personal viewpoints, right? It's very objective. It's not subjective. In all cases, let's say if you take any famous writer, let's say J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter, she has her own personal viewpoints. So she includes personal viewpoints and she includes style in all of her work. If you take Paulo Coelho, right, one of the famous or rather most widely acclaimed authors in the modern times, and he has its own style, personal viewpoints included in all his work. But scientific articles are not like. I mean, that's the most significant difference of scientific work compared to all other work. So scientific writing becomes very unique and very specific for these reasons, right? Okay, so I'm going to introduce the convention, actually 10 conventions, which are the pillars of scientific writing. And by following these conventions, I expect if you follow these conventions, general conventions, obviously like these conventions are applicable to all forms of scientific writing. So I will not going to focus on anything like a journal article, report, abstract, doesn't matter. So all these conventions are valid for all these forms of scientific writing discussed previously. So by referring to these 10 conventions, and if you learn them, you don't need to learn them by heart, by practice, right? You don't need to memorize these conventions, but always think of how they are applied in whatever context. So generally speaking, by referring to these conventions and by following and practicing, right? So what, because in scientific writing, you need to also like, you will not publish in a top journal in the very first attempt, right? You have to like, if it's a very high rank journal, probably could be an outright reject if you publish your work sometimes, right? But then you gradually try with trial and error, you learn the process, and then you probably will succeed in second or third or maybe afterwards, right? After many tries, you may still succeed in publishing in this very high rank journal. But still, the conventions won't change, right? So what are these conventions? So generally speaking, these 10 conventions are applied to any form of scientific writing, right? And if you learn these conventions and if you practice them, obviously, you will be confidently writing whatever, doesn't matter whatever the context, right? You'll be using them, and if you manipulate them properly, you can obviously like apply to them any form of scientific writing. So I will go through them one by one, all these 10. And number one, scientific writing is very conventional. It follows conventions. There are standards, specific standards, right? Everyone has to follow these conventions. If it's a convention, like in Single call them like Sammuti, right? I think you have heard of this word. Geneva Convention, Geneva Sammuti. So everyone has to abide by that, right? and if it's a convention. So in science also, everyone has to abide by these like conventions, whatever the stage that you are in. You could be an undergraduate, you could be a graduate student, PhD student, you could be a professor, very senior professor, very senior scientist, like a Nobel laureate. Doesn't matter. Everyone has to follow these conventions, right? Even if a Nobel laureate writes a paper to a journal, he has to follow that journal style. He can't follow his own style, and that journal style is style accepted by science, by the domain of science, right? Then secondly, it's clear. And it's clear in the sense that I will come to that when it comes to the explanation. It's very targeted to the point, and it's very concise, brief, right? It doesn't exaggerate things. Like in a fiction, you will find lots of exaggerations if you take a fiction, and there are lots of expansions, exaggerations, boosting, so whatsoever. These are not true for scientific writing. It's very concise, brief, to the point, right? And it's very objective in that sense. And it's very accurate. You will not report wrongful information. And even if you try to report something wrongful, this will be discovered in most cases, because if you submit your work, your scientific work for a publication, let's say publication in a reputed journal, which is indexed in any form, like an indexing sources, source, this will be subject to a blind review process, which is like done by a reviewer in the same field, and you will not know who the reviewer will be. So the paper will be reviewed by at least 2 reviewers, and then obviously they will one of them or both of them will detect if you have tried to like report false information. And then comes the editor also. The editor is also there. That will be the third reviewer, and also this principal reviewer. Initially, it's reviewed by the editor. So the editor can also detect whether you are going to report any falsified or wrong information. So accuracy is very important in science, right? If you don't try to like, if you try to manipulate data, this can be easily detected. So, and it's a matter of time that someone, even after publication, someone will detect and complain that this is like a manipulation, right? Then there's a set of formal language. In scientific writing, we never use slang or informal language. We don't use the language that is used between colleagues or friends. There's a formal language used for all scientific writing. It's not hard to learn that formal language. And this, you are learning it typically when during your undergraduate career, because you get exposed to the technical terms and other forms of writing. And then I will also point to some useful resources where you can use and apply, let's say, these formalities, the formal context is useful for scientific writing. And it's very objective. And that's opposite to subjective. Subjective always carries your own opinions. Again, this scientific writing, even if you have your own opinion, there's a way to report it. You will not say that I have this opinion about these results. You will never say something like this. In your research report also, you will never write something like this. It's written in a very objective manner, right? And that is one of the key strengths of the scientific work compared to other things, right? And there are no rather ambiguities, and which means that they don't have to more interpretations. It's just one interpretation from these, so you don't have any hidden meanings, right? And then it exercises caution. So you apply some caution when you try to describe a situation with an uncertainty. You have some very interesting data, but if you are not sure, scientific writing also gives you ways to report this, right? And this also is one key convention used in scientific writing. Then it avoids direct quotes. You will never see more or less quote by anyone. If it's any other written work, you will see plenty of quotes like within these quotation marks, like if you take general fiction or whatsoever, general form of writing, there could be lots of quotes. But in scientific writing, these quotes are absent. You will never use direct quotes. It doesn't matter what other scientists like have expressed. So you never include that in a research paper. If Albert Einstein is recognized so esteemed in the sciences, in your papers, you will never quote anything from Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein once said that this is like E is equal to mc squared, his famous equation. One of the conferences, he delivered this speech saying that this was the phenomenon. You never quote that in a research paper, right? So that's one unique point in science. It avoids direct quotes, and then it gets to the point. It's very specific, unique, addresses only the factual things, facts only. So it talks about the point. No, no going around the topic. It also never tries to like explain things out of the point. And then it's supported well with figures. These figures include like graphs, charts in all these different forms. Your data are depicted in the form of tables, bar charts, pie charts, line charts, right? Lots of, and scatter plots. There are lots of ways to explain your data. And I mean, I will not be able to go through all these things in the interest of time. And there are lots of ways that you can refer to your data, and you will probably learn them in one of your proper courses like in the curriculum. And there are lots of things illustrated with figures. So then it's supportive. So this is again another convention. You must use figures, charts, or other aspects, as well as diagrams, right? Schematics, we call them schematics or diagrams. So everything is like in if you take a typical report, whatever, the final year research report or any scientific report or any scientific journal publication, you will find all these things. There are diagrams and there are charts and there are tables. All these figures are there in scientific writing. So these again another convention. So let's try to dissect these and try to go through this the features, the 10 features. Right? The first feature, the conventional nature of scientific writing. There are some strict rules, and everyone, doesn't matter, as I said before, doesn't matter whether you are an undergraduate, whether you are a postgraduate, or whether you are a top level professor, whether you are a Nobel laureate, you still have to follow these rules, right? And then these rules are related to a number of issues. And the first most important consideration is about the structuring of your scientific work, right? And that structuring is very rigid, and you cannot exclude the structure, which means that you have to abide by this structure. There's no way that you can skip this structure. Even you are free to write anything. If you are an author of fiction, you can follow any style. It could be your own style then afterwards. But for the scientific work, you cannot, use your own style. You have to always fit to one specific style. And this is a very rigid structure. And this is not available probably like other than sciences. Generally, you don't talk about this rigid framework or structure. For instance, I think you already have some experience reading articles from scientific journals, magazines, and then all of them, they are arranged in a unique series of headings, starting from the abstract. You have the title, and then you have the abstract, and you have the introduction and the background, and then you have the materials and methods, then you have the results and discussion, and then conclusions, and some recommendations of further studies may be there, and then references. That style is unique. No matter what the journal is, yes, all journals will follow this style. There may be slight variations in the way that these the terminology and all, right? But still, these inclusions are there. Any article appearing in any journal, and these general headings could be found. So, which means that everyone should follow that structure, that framework, right? Even whether you like it or not, if you are in sciences, you have to follow that style. And it's again on the other hand, it's very easy because it's a common thing everywhere. It doesn't matter which country that you are working from. You all work in the domain of science. If you work in the domain of science, it's just one format that you have to refer to, right? When you report your work in the form of scientific writing. Then this general structure, again, you are very aware when it comes to like writing a report on an experiment for a lab work, right? Let's say, then what kind of information to be given for each of these section is very clear. You know that when you write a lab report, you have to use this information in this section and so on, right? So for instance, like your lab report may be structured in sections like aim, materials and methods, results, discussion, and references. Generally, These are the things that you would include in the RAP report. But still, this is very unique, that style, because you have to start with the aim of the experiment. So the purpose of the experiment should be described. And secondly, you have to come to the materials and methods. You have to give all the materials used, and then all the raw materials, and also the reagents, and even the concentrations, whether it's a standard reagent or whether it's a which grade the reagent belongs to, whether it's AR grade, HPLC grade, what's everything, all methods should be described, all techniques should be described in full detail, so that if anyone else can also perform it. All these research papers, take them, and if you analyze them, you see that they have given methodology so that anyone can repeat it, right? And that leads to precision. And then the techniques, materials, everything. So any difficulties in carrying out the experiments can also be described in these materials and methods. And then comes the results, the most important part, where you describe your observations, the readings that you get. And then there may be calculations if required. Then comes the discussion. This is a place where you critically evaluate the significance of your results. And then you also compare this with previous studies. And then also you try to discuss, this is the very important thing that most of you will miss. You will also try to discuss weaknesses in your experiment. So you can do the same for your research report as well in the final year. Try to discuss the weaknesses in your experiment and suggest future avenues for investigation when you do the discussion. The discussion should be a very critical evaluation with reference to previously published work always, right? You discuss your results first, and then you try to compare them with the previous work. So that should be the general approach for writing a report, lab report and a project report as well, finally whatsoever, right? First you have your results, and then these results are discussed and critically evaluated compared to previous published work. So you have received a reading in micrometers, but the previous findings have indicated that it's in millimeters. And how could you describe this difference? Is it a new finding? If it's a whole new finding, then obviously you have come through with a major breakthrough in research. So you have to still discuss that and do this critical evaluation. And this is probably something that most of you will miss. You will just show us in your final year research report some tables with some readings, and that's it. And obviously we have to come up with the discussion while doing the evaluation. It's not like that, right? You have to present all your findings, results, calculations. You have to do your calculations and then report them in the form of tables, line charts, bar charts, pie charts, in all forms of different charts. But still you have to do a critical evaluation of the values that you have presented. Compare them to previously reported values and see and explain where your values stand. Are these values acceptable, or do they comply with previous findings? Then it's fine. If there's a significant deviation, if your values are highly deviated from the previous reported value, what could be the reason? And this is the most important part of discussion that most of the students will miss. This lacks the critical evaluation part is lacking in many discussions that we read. The critical evaluation and also this discussion point to the weaknesses in the experiment, right? And then suggesting future or rather further remedial measures to come through, right? And then comes the references. Generally in a lab report and a general report, you will include the references, and then these references need to be also cited in the main text, right? And here also, like I just want to sort of like highlight one point. If you have included something in the references, that must be cited in the text, and vice versa. If anything is cited in the text, that must go in the reference list. So in most cases, we read final year research project reports. One end is lacking. You have the reference, but then you haven't cited. You have cited, but then you haven't included in the reference list. Both must tally, right? And these things you can learn while you are writing these lab reports and so on. And you don't have to wait until the final year to learn these things, right? Gradually you can learn these practices, good practices. And then there are some specific reports, like the project reports that you submit in the final year. They also should have some other contents like the table of contents. There has to be a chapter dealing with literature review, right? One whole chapter with literature review, and then specific conclusions and recommendations for further studies could be included in addition to the general or the typical structure. Right. Then, secondly, the conventions followed in scientific writing also recommends the use of abbreviations. Abbreviations are very widely used in scientific writing, and it's very common. It's a very common practice. So all forms of scientific writing generally have to deal with some technical terms, and these technical terms are sometimes very long. There are very long technical terms, and it's a must that you have to abbreviate. It's a must that they need abbreviations rather. They should be abbreviated. You can't keep writing all these very long terms, right? And while your reader reads through your reported work, reader should be comfortable rather than reading very long acronyms or whatsoever. It should be, if he or she sees only the abbreviation, then obviously it will be a comfortable reading job, pleasurable reading job. So what you should do is, like, in this sense, the practice is you never abbreviate without introducing it. So if you want to abbreviate anything, you should first introduce the expanded or the full term and give within brackets the abbreviated form, and then afterwards you can freely use the abbreviated form. But what we see in most cases, like in the case of abstracts, you just give the abbreviation, and then we have to think whether it refers to, let's say, this or that. We are not sure, right? If it's a common abbreviation, we might know it. And if it's a very specific abbreviation, obviously we might have to find and see whether this is like not something else. So you have to, as a practice, give it the full form at the beginning. Doesn't matter where it comes, like an abstract or a report or whatsoever. And obviously, in the final research report, you will have a page with abbreviations used, and because it's a very common practice in scientific writing. And the abbreviation, let's say, if you want to use the term scanning electron microscopy, then you give the full form scanning electron microscopy, and then within brackets give SCM, and afterwards you can freely use the abbreviation SCM or polymerase chain reaction or PCR, a very well-known test these days, right? And then you still give the full form polymerase chain reaction, and then give the abbreviation with the brackets, and afterwards you can simply use the term PCR throughout, right? So always try to, when you use abbreviations, and since use of abbreviations is one of the general conventions in scientific writing, make sure that you always use your abbreviation in the standard or accepted form. Let's say SCM, when we say SCM or same, it refers to scanning electron microscopy, right? And not something else, right? So generally that's understandable. And try to come up with your own, use the standard ones, and also be consistent when you write the abbreviations. If it's same, it should be always written as SEM in all uppercase, in all capitals, and not all symbols, or rather all lowercase letters or the first letter capitalized. These are not acceptable. It's only for the sake of consistency, because consistency is also one important element when it comes to scientific writing. And to maintain consistency, you have to also make sure that your abbreviation is the same, because otherwise your reader will be confused. You have given, let's say, started with ATC for something, and then it becomes ATC lowercase. We don't know, because it might be something else. Right? So make sure that it's consistent throughout. Right. Then there are some conventions applied for names and technical terms. These are mostly the formatting rules. And different scientific disciplines have their own formatting rules. Okay. Generally, let's say if you take computing, they may have their own formatting rules decided by probably ACM or IEEE or whatsoever. So if you go for a publication also, you have to find and apply, or rather follow these conventions. But in other scientific disciplines, like based on the discipline, there may be some convention. Generally speaking, for biology, you know that when you write the name of a species of animals and plants, they are given in the classic italic format, right? With the genus name. You have the genus name and the species name. The First part is the genus name, and always its first letter of the genus name is capitalized, like in the case of Homo sapiens. And in the very first use, you can use it as Homo sapiens, right? And in the original form with the first letter capitalized, and afterwards you can abbreviate it still with H sapiens, but still you have to use the italics. So this is again another convention, right? And these conventions, as I said, differ from discipline to discipline, right? Then let's say for chemical elements, you have your own ways to write. The IUPAC nomenclature is the IUPAC nomenclature decides which symbols, how the symbols are used and what form of symbols are allowed. So you have to follow this IUPAC nomenclature for chemicals and nuclear particles, like in physics, right? Whatsoever. So there are these different conventions, and again, like in computing. So you have to follow the conventions. You have to know the conventions, formatting conventions for names and technical terms, and follow these name formatting conventions for names and technical terms. And yeah, so it always is something that's has to be sorted out in your discipline. Right. Yeah. And thirdly, the conventions also refer to the use of tenses while you are writing. So scientific writing, it's quite easy to follow, because if you understand these basics of fundamentals, you can apply it, as said before, anywhere. So the use of tenses also is very specific, and this can be easily understood and identified. And this also differs based on where you use the tense and what sort of tense is applied. And again, based on the type of the information that you want to describe. And also different sections of a report might have different tenses. This is natural. So if you want to refer to already established knowledge, you usually have to refer to, in literature review, you have to always refer to some established knowledge. So these knowledge are facts, right? They are already established, and you cannot question, because these are facts. More or less you can critically evaluate, but then they are widely believed to be true. So when you refer to established knowledge or facts, you have to usually use the present tense. For instance, nutrient reabsorption is a common phenomenon in trees. So use is the present tense here. Nutrient reabsorption is a common phenomenon. So it's like present. Then when you describe your experiments, the materials and methods section, there you have to use past tense, right? In most cases, you can use passive as well, right? Passive voice. The aim of this study was to investigate and quantify the effect of something. Right? So you usually use the past tense, not the present tense. Then when you want to refer to some figures in your report already, you have some figure, and then you are going to describe that figure. It could be a schematic or diagram, it could be a chart. And then you usually write it like, write in the present tense. So it should go as table 1 shows, not in passive. So the data related to, distribution is, or rather data related to distribution are shown in table 1. It's not acceptable. Rather, you simply have to use the active voice in the present form. So it simply goes in the present tense, right? When you refer to figures in the report. This also includes tables, charts, graphs, images, schematics, anything, right? Right. Then comes the results of your experiments, right? The results section. There you have to also use the past tense, because the results have been already performed. They were performed, and then you collect the results. So the results section, you simply use statements like the results indicated, right? Indicated that there was, indicated, past, simple past. There was a rise in one and a fall in something, right? So it's simple past for the results. Then comes the answer to the research question. The answer to the research question, it comes in the part of discussion. This is where you try to like highlight your opinion or your critical evaluation about the research question. There was a research question, and then you perform the study to investigate the research question. And again, here also you use the present tense. The findings of the present investigation illustrate that, right? Present tense. So avoid using past tense here, but simply use present tense. So it's straightforward. The reader can identify that that you are talking about the answers to the research question that you have investigated. So use present tense, right? So these are the ways and means in which tense differs throughout your work, right? And then comes the referencing. Referencing is also very important for completing scientific work, but then the reference list, as said before, should be complete and it should tally with what you have cited in the text. Citations in the text should be tallying with, or should always tally with the reference list, whatever the items. And the references should be fully in the reference list. You cannot use, let's say, in citations, you can use, like, if there are two or more authors, you should use the abbreviation et al. But in the full reference list, you are not expected to use et al. Then you have to give all the authors. There were 5 authors, we have to give all the authors. Generally, what we follow for your undergraduate report, what we request. So there are lots of styles. I'm not going to describe about these styles because this will be another lecture, whole lecture, right? Probably so there are different styles that you can refer to the styles like as guided by, let's say, your department or whatsoever. And then if you specifically want to submit to any journal, the journal has its own style. It could be Harvard, it could be APE, or it could be Lanka. These 3 are the most widely used styles. And generally also, like general report writing, any of these styles are very much accepted, right? But then you don't have to do it manually. There are referencing tools like Mendeley, and there are lots of free tools as well, right? And EndNote is one of the widely used reference management tools, right? And then there's a good version, it's open source, Zotero, and you can simply download it, and your reference management will be easier when you use these tools, right? So you don't need to like manually type all these references. It's through this tool. EndNote is usually you have to purchase a license. You can use a web version, but Mendeley you can use generally. And then all of these reference management system software, they support this generally widely used referencing styles, Harvard, APA, Vancouver, whatever style. They are generally supported by all these reference management tools. So you will probably be using these tools, and then obviously you will learn about these tools in your specific courses like that you take in your degree program. Right. Then before moving to the second point, I suggest that we can take a quick break. Let's say for 5 minutes. Okay. Yeah. And before we move into the break, if you have any questions up to now, you may also ask them. Doesn't matter in whatever the language, except for Tamil, I don't speak Tamil. Any questions, doubts? If you want, you may either type it in the chat, it's fine. Okay. Yeah, if there are no questions, let's meet up 5 minutes. Right. So let's continue. And can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then there was a question, important question via the chat. Is there a page limit or word limit in scientific writing? Yes, definitely yes. And this again differs based on the audience or the context. For instance, like when you want to write a research article to a journal, there's definitely a word limit. That may be like 5,000 words or 7,000 words or whatsoever, depending on the journal. And generally speaking, for reports, if you want to submit a project report, let's say for the final year research project, we don't want you to write a project report, let's say with 250 pages. So there's some sort of informal limit. There's no such strict limit because you may work, I mean, you may report your major findings, and but then you may still have an appendix, which is fairly long. But your major work may be like, let's say, about 50 to 75 pages. Generally, for an undergraduate work, you could effectively describe all your work within, I think, like within 50 to 75 pages maximum. You don't need to write even 100 pages, right? But then again, because when you want to add, let's say, coding, if it's a computer report or any other statistical results or something, then they come under appendices, and then the report may be longer. Then whether in methodology, whether you have to include every step, yes, in the sense like it's not stepwise, but generally you have to summarize. Generally, there has to be a broad summary of the approach procedure. So when you read the research paper, you will realize that the research paper, the methods are described in a way that someone else can also repeat the methodology. That's why you have to give the reagents, the type of the reagents, or type of the, even for applications that you use, whether you use like statistical tools, whether you use Minitabs, as so what is the methodology used for data analysis, everything is given in the methodology, right? So that anyone can repeat and produce the same results, with the same instruments or whatsoever. And then this is actually the beauty of science. All these experiments are repeatable, and then if these same results are obtained, then this is a validation that you get in science. There's no need to repeat like methodology. Like if you see in a paper, it's not, the information is not repeated. Only the critical steps are listed, but then there is a summary, sort of like, yeah, where you come up with an overall picture of the methodology. And which step we have to use while putting observations. Which step in the sense, which tense. Okay. Now observations results, because you have obtained it, I think like I have yeah, referred to it in the previous phase. Observations are your results, so you have to use the past tense. Okay. So always like best referred in the past tense. Right. So if you have any other questions, you may put them in the chat, like drop them in the chat, so I'll probably answer them later. Great. Right. So let's move to convention number 2. Scientific writing, the purpose is like to inform the audience in a specific manner. So it's very clear. It's very clear in the sense like if you take a piece of scientific writing, per sentence there is like one idea. I mean, you don't put two contradictory ideas together in one sentence. And then typically the sentences are 10 to 25 words long, not too long, right? Because when it's too long, probably when you are at the end, you will not remember what was at the beginning, if it's like 50 words. So general, the flexible reading limit identified by research is this mean. Right? 10 to 25 words is a very flexible limit that you can relaxingly focus and pay attention to. So this is the average. And also like paragraphs, you have to group your work into paragraphs, and each paragraph revolves around one theme. You don't put two themes in one paragraph. One key idea, each paragraph revolves around one theme, right? And then that should be also related. You don't describe, rather try to describe two contradictory ideas in one paragraph. One theme, one paragraph. One idea, one sentence. So keep to that, and then you will obviously write a good piece of writing when it comes to scientific writing. So, for instance, read through this paragraph and see how many sentences are there, and try to get the average number of words in the sentences, average number and average number. Just take about 2-3 minutes to read through and see. I mean, you can just drop it via chat. Just for Yeah, there's a question about whether you can use past passive in experimental, observations. Not really for observations, but for the experimental section, it's fine. Experimental section, you can use passive. Usually it's past passive. And then for results, it's just passive. Just past tense, not necessarily passive. Passive is used when the doer is not important. In experimental section, what matters is what you did, not who you, right? Not who did it, right? When what matters is not who did it, then you can use passive. But results, you can use simple past report. So because in methodology, our focus is on the approach, not how you did it, not who did it. Obviously, you did it yourself. We know that, but it doesn't need to be highlighted that I did this experiment. You never write that in methodology. I measured with this instrument. You never write. You can simply use passive there in the methodology because the action is more important than the doer. But for reporting your observations, use simple past. Right. So how many? Yes, someone has counted the number of words. Fine. And how many sentences are here in this paragraph? And do you think that this is a good readable paragraph? And does this illustrate the idea very well? When you read through, can you follow what the, yes, it's about 5 sentences, yes. And on average, someone is telling that there are 15 words, fine. Yes. But what is the general opinion? Is it a good flow? And does it revolve around a good key or central idea? Can you follow it easily? You may use the chat too if you want. You can open up your mic and stay. You like this style, or do you like the flow of the paragraph? Is easy to read? Yes, someone has an opinion about the others. Read through and see whether this is well organized, well structured or not. Yes, there are 5 sentences. Reading 5 sentences is obviously not a hard task. Yes. Right. So as you would read, this paragraph is like well structured because it has one central theme idea, tries to describe about the classification systems behind headache, right? And then it goes on explaining two supportive ideas to the main idea, and then it goes on illustrating some sub-supportive ideas with examples. Then there comes the 2 most common types of primary headache disorders are there. How headache disorders are classified, primary, secondary, and then primary again to some other types. So this is like well structured, nice flow is there, good flow is there, right? Very well structured. And this is one good paragraph that you can take as a good example to show how clear that you should write in sciences, right? So this is the clarity expected when you write in sciences, right? This kind of a clear flow, clear logical order, right? Main idea, supportive idea, and then the sub-supportive idea. So that order is there, right? Then number 3, it's very concise. Scientific writing generally is very concise because you use the minimum number of words. You don't write lengthy sentences. You have to tell your story with only the minimum number of possible words. For instance, like because brevity or shortness or conciseness is very important. For instance, like you may replace instead of with now. You will not write at the present time, right? And sorry, instead of at the present time, you will write now. You don't have to write at the present time. And you can simply replace it with the shorter version like now. You don't write in close proximity to in scientific writing. Instead, you simply write near. So you don't write elongated sentences in this way because in scientific writing, what matters are the facts only. It's not fiction, it's just the facts. And then when you try to keep the sentences 10 to 25 words in length, this is the range comfort zone for your brain asset. The brain can quickly process this many words and can quickly grab the idea. So it's it will be very important if you keep these standards. Then again, you have to avoid repetition in the sentence. So the repetition in the sentence, like if you try to stop one sentence from somewhere and then restart the next sentence with the same point that you stopped at, then obviously it gives rise to repetition. So repetition is not only boring, it will also confuse the reader. So repetition is something that should be avoided because this reduces clarity and the flow of your work. Right. Number 4, the work needs you are reporting is very accurate. In sciences, what you report is very accurate, right? So which means that you can simply refer to everything in simple terms, like you use exactly the required purpose for the required word for the required purpose only. For instance, you don't usually say exactly identical, but you simply say it's identical. Right? You don't need to write like you write in the general context. Then you may avoid certain unclear or vague terms like most, and these are very subjective. For instance, you may never use a sentence in scientific writing. The pH was measured uh, regularly. The reader never knows what regularly means. It could be once in every 10 minutes, once in every hour. Right? Hourly, you may have taken the pH value hourly, or you may have taken like once in every 24 hours. So you never know. So that's why you need to be very accurate and precise. So the pH was measured every 15 minutes is the best way to describe your experiment rather than telling the pH was measured regularly. You never know that frequency, right? So don't keep your reader guessing. You have to give the exact fact. And then you usually avoid overgeneration in scientific writing. You never say it's widely accepted. It's a widely accepted phenomenon. But you will usually say it's widely accepted, but you will not say, you will never say it, everyone knows that. So everyone knows that it's fine for general writing, non-scientific writing, but for scientific writing, you would rather say it's widely accepted. So this is like the difference when it comes to accuracy. Then number 5, scientific writing uses a very formal language, but this formal language is not too formal because otherwise it becomes jargon. So jargon is all these technical and other stuff used in a discipline. Let's say if you use jargon from computing, a general public will not understand it. And also non-computing people will not understand if you use the computer jargon too much. And also if you use jargon from, let's say, food sciences, it might not be understood by those who study, let's say, some other discipline like sports sciences and also the computing people, right? So you have to use formal language, but you should not use excessive jargon. So that will also kill the essence of scientific writing. And you don't contract or shorten. You will not probably write don't using an apostrophe, right? So this style is not usually recommended, but you have to use the full form, do not. You don't contract. And then you don't use colloquialism or euphemism. Generally speaking, if you, in general writing, you would say if someone died, that person passed away. But scientific writing does have no concern for these things. Colloquialisms or euphemisms and general conversational terms are avoided, right? And for instance, in general conversation, you might use a term like bang on. That's fine for general conversation, general speaking. But in scientific writing, you will use exactly to mean the same thing, right? So this is where you use this formality, language formality is there. And generally, when you talk between each other, you might use near enough, but in scientific writing, you use approximately, right? You wouldn't say near enough. You would rather refer to children as kids in general writing, but in scientific writing, they are children. You never write kids in scientific writing, right? So likewise, there are some formalities in language. And then also no anthropomorphism in the sense like if you want to refer to babies in scientific writing, you never write babies, but you write offsprings, right? So there are certain formalities, right? These are formalities that you have to like grab hold of. And then you never try to become too polite in scientific writing. Generally speaking, if you have some test subjects, you would say 27-year-old man was taken as a test subject, right? Was recruited as a test subject. And you don't say that 27-year-old gentleman was recruited as a test subject. So generally, this politeness is not required for science. That's why it makes it very easy, convenient. You don't have to guess which version to use. That's direct, right? So you would simply say man or woman rather than saying gentleman already. But generally, in conversation, you will never refer to them as man or woman. It's considered, offensive. Then there are no run-ons like you don't write etc. too many, so on, right? You give the exact value. So don't use too many etc's and so ons in scientific writing. Yeah, because if you want to stop a list, you go until the final value and don't write etc. Stop it there, and then if you know the exact things, give the exact elements, not writing etc. And then also it's important to try using an active style, active voice rather than referring to the passive style, because the passive style, the doer is not there. In the sense like the active style always follow the subject verb object pattern or arrangement. There's a subject, there's a verb, and there's an object. So it's very clear. Everyone can understand very easily when things are written in active voice. But passive voice, the object is not there, right? And for this reason, passive voice is not used for all contexts, but only it's restricted for certain cases, like when you write the materials and methods. As I said, the doer is not important, but the action matters. Action is most important, right? So otherwise, in all other cases, you are expected to write in active voice, right? So that it's clear. Subject, verb, object pattern is there, and everyone can easily figure out. No guesses, so it's directly there. No guesses about who did that or whatsoever. Object is there, right? Okay. Then convention number 5 also requires the use of like passive voice and active voice is illustrated in this like example. So for instance, in the active voice, you would say, I observed the angle to be. And in the passive voice, the angle was observed to be. And if there's no importance about the doer, then you might use passive. So, but then the doer is absent, object is not there. The author suggests, it is suggested in the passive, right? The author suggests, it is suggested in the passive. We use the standard graphical representation too. The standard graphical representation was used too. So likewise, there are differences between the active and passive voice, and you have to use this very carefully. Whether if you want to highlight the doer, yes, you have to use active. If you don't want to highlight the doer, right, then you can use passive. Yeah, and then also there's with regard to the active style, there's also leakage for the use of the specific person, in the sense like whether you use first person or the third person, right? So you usually use I and we when you use like active style, whereas the third person, right, will be used when it comes to the passive constructs, right? For instance, like for instance, in the first person sense and active style, I found. In the third person sense, in the passive style, it's written as it was found there. So if you don't think that there was any significance in writing the person behind this, then obviously you can say that in scientific writing it was found there. I assume it was assumed that. So likewise, the third person context is more or less associated with the passive. Then person as a subject versus thing as subject in both passive and active, this is again a difference. I notice, and when you write the same in passive, analysis of the data indicated. I noticed that there was something like this in the data, and then instead you use a thing as a subject, but then it's given as analysis of the data indicator, something like this. In the report, I will show, or in this or rather in this thesis I will show. This report presents. So this is the way to write usually this abstract presents, or this synopsis presents. So this is the general way that you would write, right? So these formalities are followed in scientific writing, right? Then number 6, by the convention of scientific writing includes that it's very objective. So objective writing, the idea is to avoid very loaded or very emotive words, in the sense like your personal opinions don't matter, right? And there are maybe some, again, because the readers may jump to some prejudices because of these loaded or emotional words. For instance, like you will not sort of like use situations like scandalous or ridiculous. For instance, like if you use a sentence like sadly half of the mice used in the experiment died, right? If you use sort of like this kind of a construct in a report, you have to replace sad with the objective version of the same thing, right? Sad is something indicating that you have some personal emotions, the word. So you have to be very careful with regard to the use of these subjective versus objective words. So you would rather say that unfortunately, half of the mice used in the experiment died, right? Instead of saying sad. And unfortunately is a better objective word. So in science, this is the difference compared to general writing. You will naturally tend to use all these objective forms of word, right? And also, you should also avoid expressing your unsupported thoughts or beliefs. So if you want to claim anything, you must make sure that there is appropriate evidence for that claim. Otherwise, you will not claim it, right? This is again something that you should keep in mind. You don't just claim anything. Otherwise, if you don't have evidence. All claims need to be supported by evidence. We always ensure that you have some data. You claim that these data are correct, but then you have to support it with evidence that these data are correct, right? And also you have to aim to write as a neutral outside observer. You are writing for the advancement of science in general. So you should also think of that neutral. You are trying to write this as a neutral outside observer. You should not involve your personal emotions or personal any involvements, right? There shouldn't be any such personal elements in this thing. So that's the objective. For instance, like this paragraph, if you read through, it's written in a very subjective style. So just take a couple of minutes to read this paragraph, and then I will show the objective version of this. Sometimes you may have come across this R-squared values. If you have done a regression analysis, how good the fit is. This R-squared value determines how good the fit is. Right. They are trying to evaluate the concentration of contaminant called PCB, polychlorinated biphenates. It's an inanimate contaminant. They are trying to explain this in the paragraph. So can someone point out to few terms which would make this a very subjective style of writing? Can someone, you can drop it via, yes, exactly, correct. Shamil, yes. There are some words that qualify this to be a very subjective one. You can easily figure out these words. Well, Excel is here to refer to this Excel, Microsoft Excel. Excel spreadsheet is, I mean, it's technical still. You may find many other words. Yes, very well, yes. It's another word. Very subjective. Yes. Silly. Right. What else? There are lots of subjective words here. Okay, lowest maybe also. Yeah, but then if you read the same paragraph written in an objective style, you will realize the difference. Right, now read through this. So probably in this version, you will realize that you don't have words like really quite good, right? Silly, right? These things are avoided. So it was rather time consuming. Instead of that, you would see something like rather time consuming, right? So the results appear to be reasonable instead of telling that they are, let's say, in the previous version, you had like really quite good, silly. These things are not there. Right? Instead of that, you have like something like reasonable. So that makes scientific writing unique. The use of the objective style. And then rule number 7 or convention number 7, there is some cautiousness applied here. And this also relates to whatsoever degree to accuracy, right? So in scientific writing, it's very important that you write something exactly in the way that you mean it. Then you don't usually overstate things. And generally, you have to use like special care, and that's why it means cautiousness. You have to use special care when you use terms like proves or definitely. If it's something definitely, when you use the term definitely, you have to be very sure that this is going to be the absolute case. Otherwise, you would not use terms like proves or definitive, right? So these words are called hedging words, and you will usually find these hedging words in scientific writing, but they should be used in a very cautious manner. So this shows some sort of list of these hedging words, like there could be nouns, adverbs, and verbs. Some nouns includes supposition, idea, speculation, which means guessing, conjecture, also about guessing, possibility, inference, also about some sort of a guess, and then some adverbs like presumably, probably, possibly, apparently, not likely, seemingly, and also some verbs like appear, postulate, suggest, seem, maybe, speculate. And when we use these words, these hedging words or indirect words, you have to uh, exercise special caution. For instance, like one rule that you can follow here is that you never use more than one hedging word per sentence. For instance, if you read this sentence, these results may possibly suggest. There are so many hedging words may possibly suggest that there is a likelihood. Likelihood is something not sure, that this species could be vulnerable. Could be vulnerable again. About you are expressing some doubt to extinction, right? So if you want to write the same thing in a proper manner in scientific writing, you would rather write a sentence like this. These results suggest that this species is at risk of extinction. So simply as that, because there are too many hedging words here, and that probably might kill the objectivity in science. So scientific writing needs to be objective. When you use too many of these hedging words, this may kill the objectivity of the science. Right? So you have to like refrain from using too many uh, hedging words. And again, all scientific forms of writing, scientific writing, avoids direct quotations, no quotation, because and there's a reason. So think about any case that you would use direct quotation, and these direct quotations are generally okay when it comes to, let's say, a newspaper article or fiction, but not for scientific report. There's no point. No matter even what Einstein was saying about something, it doesn't apply to scientific work. So you would only use a direct quotation from a source when these exact words used by the author are essential to make your points. Only in that case, right? But these are very rare cases, right? So this is very rare. And because in science, what matters is the fact, the idea. So you have to like keep this also away. And then you also tend to explain your idea in your own words. And this is most likely a form of paraphrasing that you usually do when you take some already published work and rewrite it in your own words. This is paraphrasing. So you have to do sort of paraphrasing. And so this demonstrates, so the way that you explain your idea should demonstrate that you understand the issue fully, right? And then still you have to do this by citing the proper source as well, because you are critically evaluating your results, and then you always refer to some source, and then you have to use the proper language there, and also you have to avoid direct quotes in doing so as well. But you just take the facts in a paraphrasing manner, right? Number 9, it's always about getting to the point. So more than any other form of writing, scientific writing cares more about the extraction or skimming or scanning. And if in scientific writing, if any reader can't see the point in the paragraph, let's say in a sentence, in the first 30 seconds, probably that reader will not read it at all. So you have to make sure that you tell your reader the exact point behind the sentence in about, let's say, 20 to 25 words. That's why this word limit is recommended, right? Yeah. And then last but not least, scientific writing is always about doing illustrations of your data and findings with lots of types of illustrations, supporting illustrations. And this includes tables where you summarize data, graphs, charts, photographs, images, uh, schematics that you create, diagrams that you create, and then also all figures. If you want to use a figure in your report, and you can still reuse it from somewhere with the permission or rather with giving the source, but this should be good quality, which means that there should be the right sort of like quality should be there, and otherwise like the report, the reader will not see the original quality in the image, right? So you have to also like make sure that these are good quality, and then you have to keep it as simple as possible. For instance, don't use plot 10 sets of data on the same graph. It's just like if you want to graph, just let's say use 2 sets of data or 3 sets of data, no more than 5 sets of data. So if you use 10 sets of data in one graph, no one will understand it, right? And then again, if you can represent each set of data in only one illustration, in one chart or whatsoever, in one table, one graph, but try to use only one format. Don't represent the same data in a table and also a chart. Just give one. If you think that the table is the best way to summarize the data, yes, use a table. And then don't use a chart. If you think the chart is the best way to summarize the data, then write a line chart. Draw a line chart, not a table, right? Then also the figures in your report or other scientific work should be very well labeled. And then there has to be a very descriptive title for each figure. Then the figures need to be consistently numbered, like 1, 2, 3, and you don't write 1 and then you write B to the next one, and then you write Roman numeral 3 to the next one. That's not consistent. So you have to follow the same style. If you started writing Roman numeral 1, then it should be Roman numeral 2, Roman numeral 3. If you started writing A for the first figure, A, B, C, likewise, right? So each figure should have a figure legend. So you know that just below the figure is the figure legend with the description, right? And the description should also describe the experiment. And this is when you read the journal article, you will see that the figures also come with the description, right? Then also the key points about the illustration should be discussed in the main text, and also then you have to also substitute the references. Right? So that brings us to the end of these conventions, which means that through 10 conventions, through these 10 conventions, I have tried to illustrate that you can still use scientific writing in any context if you follow these 10 conventions, and if you understand these 10 conventions, no matter what the context is, you can still do a good job, right? And then before winding up, there's also one important point that I should bring up, right? Again, another question, And in all these forms of scientific writing, you should avoid all forms of plagiarism. And what is plagiarism? Plagiarism is the simple act of representing someone else's work as your own work. Right? We usually discover this in many forms of scientific writing submitted by students in reports, assignments, all forms. Right? You just nowadays you just simply tend to directly obtain stuff from web page and just simply copy and paste the context without even changing a single word, and then obviously that's plagiarism because it's not your own work, it's someone else's work, right? And that is a practice that every reader should, or rather every scientific writer should avoid plagiarism. And I hope that you will understand the consequences of plagiarism because when you present someone else's idea as your own, it's form of cheating and academic dishonesty. So as novice scientific writers, you should always refrain from this practice, right? And this involves cutting and pasting from other sources, quoting without a citation mark, so that we will not see that it's words spoken by someone else, and also paraphrasing without any citation. You can rewrite these ideas in your own words, but then you have to give the citation. Then you have to, when you want to use images and tables or graphs, you have to give reference to the original sources if it's not an image created by you. Then even when you want to resubmit your own work, let's say, imagine you submitted an assignment in the second year and you had an introductory paragraph which you include in an assignment submitted in the fourth year. It still counts of plagiarism because it has been already evaluated and graded, right? So resubmitting your own work, reusing your own work, which was previously graded or marked, would also include plagiarism. And also, generally, what is meant to be an individual work, if you do in a collaborative manner, then also this might be one qualification for plagiarism. And then, in all cases, what you should do is you have to give reference, right? Give the appropriate reference and give citation. So this way is the only way to avoid plagiarism, right? So if you have any doubt, if it's not your work, so you always have to cite. And this is the only way that you can make yourself confident that you are free from plagiarism. Right. So with that, you also have to ensure that in all your cases of work, you give credit to the original source. And if you want to use someone else's idea, hypothesis, opinion, theory, or whatsoever, always use the reference, right? Use cite the reference. Anything, any facts, statistics, graphs, which are not your own, drawings, any piece of information, any research finding which is not your own work, give the source, right? And if it's not part of common knowledge, if it's general knowledge or common knowledge, you don't have to, refer or give any citation. Let's say if you want to say that the Earth is a globe, you don't need to cite any reference because it's a general fact. It's part of common knowledge. And the actual spoken words by another person or written words needs also be cited. So that's also will make you free from sort of plagiarism. And then make sure that before you submit your report or manuscript, you ensure that you have given the citation and also the reference. Both are important. Right. Then finally, about some facts about good scientific writing. So after going through these, the pillars of writing, you have to assume that these are easy to follow. But even the most influential papers that you see in science, they don't have that bigger impact. They are not probably written very well. And they also don't refer to big scientific work as well. And as a general rule, for most scientists, what matters is good writing, right? And so if you refer to these good pieces of work, which are generally published in these highly accepted journals like Nature or Science, you realize that these publications rely on few things, like there are strong ideas, there are solid reasoning behind these ideas, and they are very clear. and they are very concise. So if you happen to read anything published in these sources like Nature or Science, these are the topmost journals in the field of science, right? It's very difficult to publish in these journals. It has to be a very top level or breakthrough scientific discovery. And if you read any papers published in these journals, what you will realize are that there are these facts. There are strong ideas, there are solid reasonings, there are clear things, and there are very concise things referred to in these pieces of work, right? And having said that, one last thing, if you want to like become a prolific scientific writer, as a summary, you need to learn some effective strategies for overcoming that writer's block, which is like barriers barriers could be different for each. Now, each of you have different barriers. Sometimes you may not know certain technical terms, and then you need to find ways to improve your technical knowledge. And sometimes it's a matter of vocabulary, right? And then also, right, you have to learn how to convey your idea in a formal writing style. The elements of formal writing style we have discussed. And then also you have to learn how to make through the publication process. The publication process is not one step, it's stepwise, right? And then you have to wait until you get through this whole process, right? And in a nutshell, scientific writing, it's all about science. And then you have to also remember that it's style and it's an art as well as a craft. So it requires some effort and it takes some time to learn, right? So good writing is absolutely always hard work. It will not come overnight, in one night. So probably like if you are in the first year still, you may still have 3 years to improve yourself. But if you are in the third or fourth year, you have some limited time to improve yourself. But remember always it's an art and craft. Like in all arts and crafts, you have to master the styles. Like if you want to master, let's say, the pottery, you have to learn it by doing it. So here also you have to learn it by doing it. You have to keep writing and then polish your things and then refine your things, and ultimately if you start doing it in the first year, then obviously in the fourth year it will be a easy job, right? But then this is like a time taking effort. Okay, now like I said, I will try to like point you to some of these important resources that you went find useful for your writing. And this includes some good resources found on the web. And one of the ideal resources that I can recommend is this Urdu online writing lab from the University of Urdu. And then this academic phrase bank from the Manchester University, United Kingdom, has some suggestions for phrases that can be generally, applied in your writing. So as undergraduates, this will be very useful if you to develop your vocabulary, to find these phrases and use these phrases. Then thirdly, the Learning Headquarters is an initiative by the Monash University, Australia. And this has a specific writing section. And then you can take this, I mean, it's free. You can refer to them and you can see that these are lots of things to learn. And then there's also one good, it's kind of old book, but it's available freely online. This is called Elements of Style by William Strunk, and it's available online via this web address. And this is a classic text referred to by many courses. In many scientific writing courses, this is given, and this is because it describes all these style related aspects. So as undergraduates, this is one good learning resource for you. I highly recommend you to like go through this book. It's not a large book. It's not a very comprehensive one, but it nicely introduces a different writing style that can be adapted in what form of the style. It doesn't matter, scientific or whatsoever. Right. Then there's one important text. If you happen to read this, The Craft of Scientific Writing, the latest edition, I think, is the fourth edition by Michael Ali. This is one ideal text. To ever get hold of this text, this is an ideal resource, not only for undergraduates, for all scientific writers, right? Even there are things that professors can learn. Okay. And in addition, now you have these MOOC platforms edX, Coursera, plenty of courses are there. You can freely enroll and you can improve your scientific writing skills. And I recommend taking the course through these platforms as well. Right. So with that, I think like I'm going to wind up or conclude this session. And thank you very much for your kind attention. I think there may have been some disturbances because of this ongoing rain. I'm really sorry for that. It is beyond my control. But before closing the session, it's time now. If you have any questions, quick questions, or if any doubts are there to be clarified, you can you may use the mic if you want, or you may just drop it via the chat. If there's anything that you need to get clarified. It's a short session of 2 hours, and I can't obviously like teach all aspects of scientific writing with this time frame, but I hope you probably now have gathered the key points. I mean, just simply applying all these 10 conventions, it helps you to like write for all different audiences or contexts. Right. Any questions, comments, doubts? Nothing, all okay. Okay, someone is asking about Mendeley. Mendeley, it's you know like EndNote. It's a referencing tool that you can freely access, right? And it can be integrated with easily with Word. And like Mendeley is mostly recommended when you work with publications, let's say LCV or something, right? And you can freely learn it. Like there's a free version, free reference manager, okay? And it's quite easy to organize your references through Mendeley. And generally speaking, most of these reputed publishers, they recommend reference management systems, and most of Mendeley is free, as I said. Most of these publishers will recommend you to use Mendeley as a reference management, because EndNote is not free. And yeah, that's about Mendeley. And then simply just search for Mendeley, and then you will download it, and you will integrate it with Word or whatsoever, and it can be easily. This is where you can easily deposit your research, articles that you refer, in the sense like you just need to edit to the library in a proper way, and then you can simply insert it from there, right? And as said before, there's also a free version, freeware called Zotero, which may also be better, right? What does it mean to write clear and precise? Clearly writing in the sense that it should be based on facts, and there shouldn't be no two interpretations. That's what you mean by writing clear and precisely. And it should be always like discussing or revolving around some objectives, right? And there shouldn't be any ambiguities. There should be one direct meaning, right? And if you are, let's say, if you encounter a piece of scientific writing, and then if you tend to be guessing, then it's not a clear and precise form of writing. When you write, you should not let any form of guessing to the reader. It should be very direct, right? And direct, and it should not have any two interpretations. It should be like only one interpretation. Whether you can use a paraphrasing tool to avoid plagiarism. Well, paraphrasing tools, maybe I'm not sure to what extent these tools can support. But the simplest way to avoid plagiarism is use paraphrasing and Also, even if you use paraphrasing, just give the reference, just cite the reference. That's the best way to provide criticism. Obviously, you have to paraphrase, and then paraphrasing, make sure that it's your own words, and you cannot simply, replace one or two words and call it a paraphrase version, but you have to significantly change the original version, and still you have to give the reference. Well, paraphrasing tools might be there, but it's not sure whether this can totally avoid plagiarism. So it's rather better to put your own effort. Then this is also going to be a very good learning experience, right? Because you will also improve your vocabulary and all, and then also the technical writing skills. Everything will be improved, right? Okay. Right. So there seems to be questions, and then no more questions. I cannot see any more questions in the chat. Yeah. So with that, let me conclude this session, and I would like to thank the organizing committee again of the Students' Union of the Faculty of Applied Sciences for giving me this opportunity to present some of my thoughts and share my experience with you on scientific writing. Right. Thank you very much.
Let me thank you on behalf of the Organization Committee, Faculty of Applied Sciences, University of Sabaragamuwa, the Senior Lecturer, Mr. A.L.C.J. Lienage, for your wonderful and knowledgeable section. I think that we all got a good knowledge in this session. Let me thank you all the people who supported and guided to make this event success, especially our speaker. Thank you.
You're welcome, and good night.